in the heart of autumn, when the air was crisp and leaves crunched underfoot. Our small village of Havenbrook experienced a phenomenon that would forever haunt its inhabitants. It began with a single phone call, a chilling whisper that set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. I was at the diner, the only one in town, when the first call came. Maggie, the waitress who had been serving coffee and pancakes for as long as I could remember, suddenly went pale. She dropped the phone, and it clattered loudly against the counter. "What's wrong, Maggie?" I asked, trying to hide the unease creeping into my voice. She looked at me with wide eyes, trembling. It was a whisper. It said I would die tonight. The whole diner fell silent. The usual chatter and clinking of silverware ceased. The tension was palpable. We all knew Maggie. She was the heart of our community, always there with a warm smile and a kind word. The idea of her dying was unthinkable. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. "It's probably just a prank," I said, more to convince myself than anyone else. "Whoever it is, they're trying to scare you." But that night, Maggie was found dead in her home, her phone off the hook. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, but those of us who knew her well believed it was the fear that killed her. The calls didn't stop. They came randomly, each one predicting the death of another villager. Always a whisper, always chillingly accurate. People began to live in fear, dreading the sound of their phone ringing. The police were at a loss, unable to trace the calls. The phone company found no anomalies. It was as if the calls came from nowhere. My turn came on a cold, stormy night. I was alone in my house, the wind howling outside, when the phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up. A raspy whisper filled my ear. "Your time is near, John. Tomorrow, when the clock strikes midnight." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my living room, a baseball bat by my side, my eyes darting to every shadow that moved in the flickering candlelight. The next day, I went to the police, but there was nothing they could do. The whole village was in a state of panic. People were leaving, abandoning their homes in search of safety, but I couldn't leave. I had to know who was behind these calls. As midnight approached, I felt a growing sense of dread. I paced my house, every creak of the floorboards sending shivers down my spine. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked loudly, each second bringing me closer to my supposed demise. Then, just as the clock began to chime, the phone rang. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked it up. The whisper was barely audible over the sound of the storm outside. "You will die, John. You cannot escape." I hung up and grabbed the bat, my knuckles white with fear. I stood in the middle of my living room, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Midnight came and went, and I was still alive. The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. The phone rang again. This time, the voice was different. It was deeper, more menacing. "John, do you remember Emily?" The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. Emily was a girl I had known decades ago, back when we were children. She had been stalked by a maniac, a man who had terrorized our village with his silent calls. Emily had gone missing, and the stalker was never caught. The case had remained unsolved, a dark stain on Havenbrook's history. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The whisperer laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "I am the one who was never caught. I am the one who has returned to finish what I started." The line went dead. I stood there, the realization dawning on me. The stalker had never left. He had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, expecting to hear that chilling whisper. I tried to warn the villagers, but most of them had already fled. Those who remained were living in a state of constant terror. I began to dig into the old case files, desperate to find any clue that might help me stop this madman. I spent hours in the dusty archives, poring over newspaper clippings and police reports. The more I read, the more I realized how little we had known about the stalker. He was a ghost, a phantom who had eluded capture for decades. One night, as I was going through the files, I found a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of Emily, taken just days before she disappeared. In the background, barely visible, was a figure standing in the shadows. His face was obscured, but there was something about his posture that seemed eerily familiar. I took the photo to the police, but they were skeptical. "It's an old photo, John," the chief said, shaking his head. "There's not much we can do with it." Frustrated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to Emily's old house, which had been abandoned for years. The place was falling apart, the windows boarded up, the garden overgrown. As I walked through the decaying rooms, I felt a sense of unease, as if I was being watched. In the attic, I found a box of Emily's belongings. Among them was a diary, its pages yellowed with age. I sat down and began to read, my heart pounding as I turned the pages. The entries were filled with fear and despair. Emily's words painting a picture of a girl haunted by a relentless stalker. The last entry sent a shiver down my spine. It was dated the day before she disappeared. "He called again. He said he would come for me tonight. I can hear him outside, watching, waiting. I'm so scared." I closed the diary, my mind racing. The stalker had come for Emily, just as he was now coming for me. I had to find him before it was too late. As I left the house, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the garden. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized it was the same man from the photograph. He was watching me, his eyes cold and calculating. I ran back to my car and drove to the police station, but by the time I got there, the man was gone. The chief looked at me with pity. "John, you need to get some rest. You're seeing things." But I knew what I had seen. The stalker was real, and he was coming for me. I couldn't rely on the police. I had to face him on my own. That night, I sat in my living room, the baseball bat by my side, waiting. The hours ticked by, the silence oppressive. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, the phone rang. I picked it up, my hand trembling. The whisper was softer this time, almost a caress. "I'm here, John. I'm watching you." I hung up and stood, my eyes scanning the room. The shadows seemed to move, twisting and writhing in the dim light. I felt a presence, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned, swinging the bat, but there was no one there. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. Instead, I ran out of the house, into the night. The streets were empty, the village silent. I headed to the only place I could think of, the old church on the outskirts of town. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary where I hoped I could find some answers. As I entered the church, the heavy wooden doors creaked shut behind me. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. I made my way to the altar, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I knelt and prayed, my hands clasped tightly. "Please help me. Show me what to do." In the silence, I heard a whisper, not from the phone, but from within. It was Emily's voice, soft and clear. "He's here, John. He never left. You have to end this. I stood, a sense of resolve washing over me. I turned to face the darkness, my heart pounding. The stalker was here, in the church, watching me. I walked slowly down the aisle, the bat held tightly in my hands. The shadows seemed to close in around me, but I pressed on. I had to end this. In the back of the church, I saw him. The man from the photograph, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "It's over," I said, my voice steady. "You're not going to hurt anyone else." He laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You think you can stop me? I've been doing this for years. You can't stop what you can't see." But I could see him, and I wasn't going to let him win. I charged at him, the bat swinging. He dodged, but I was faster. I struck him, the bat connecting with a sickening thud. He fell, but I didn't stop. I kept swinging. When Emily and I moved into the house on Raven Street, we believed we had found our dream home. It was a charming Victorian with a wraparound porch and ivy crawling up the side. We imagined ourselves sipping coffee in the morning sun, hosting dinner parties, and eventually raising a family there. The price seemed too good to be true, but we were eager to settle into a place we could call our own. The real estate agent mentioned a tragic history, but we brushed it off as an old house's quirk. The first night, we were too exhausted from moving to notice anything unusual. We collapsed into bed, surrounded by boxes, and fell into a deep sleep. It wasn't until the second night that I heard it. A faint, almost rhythmic thudding coming from below us. I nudged Emily awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She strained to listen, her eyes wide in the darkness. The sound continued, a soft, persistent thud coming from the basement. We crept downstairs, clutching each other's hands. The door to the basement was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and descended the creaky wooden steps. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes and cobwebs. The thudding stopped as soon as we reached the bottom, leaving us in an eerie silence. I shined the flashlight around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. We returned to bed, unease settling in the pit of my stomach. Over the next few days, we started to notice other odd occurrences. Objects moved from where we had left them, strange cold spots in the house, and a lingering feeling of being watched. Emily suggested we learn more about the house's history, hoping it would explain the strange happenings. A visit to the local library revealed a chilling past. The house on Raven Street had been the site of a series of brutal murders over 20 years ago. A family of 4 had been slaughtered in their beds, their bodies discovered in the basement. The murderer was never caught, leaving a shadow of mystery and fear over the property. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of living in a house where such horrors had occurred gnawed at me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it again. The thudding. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I grabbed the flashlight and headed for the basement, leaving Emily asleep. As I reached the basement, the thudding grew louder. It seemed to come from behind a stack of old boxes. I moved them aside, revealing a small door hidden in the wall. It was old and rusted, the kind you'd expect to see in a horror movie. My heart pounded as I opened it, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passageway. I squeezed through, my flashlight flickering, as if struggling against the darkness. The passageway led to a small room, empty, except for a single, old wooden chair in the center. The walls were covered in scratches, as if someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. I shivered, backing out of the room and sealing the door behind me. When I returned to bed, Emily was awake, her face pale. "What's happening here, Mark?" she whispered. I feel like we're not alone. The following day, we contacted the previous owner, hoping for answers. Mrs. Harding was a frail, elderly woman who seemed relieved to have sold the house. When we asked about the murders, her expression turned grave. They never caught him, she said, her voice trembling. They say the killer was someone close to the family, someone who knew the house well. I always felt a presence, like he never left. Her words sent chills down my spine. The idea that the killer could still be in the house, watching us, was unbearable. We decided to leave, packing our essentials and planning to stay at a hotel until we could figure things out. As we were leaving, Emily went to fetch her phone from the bedroom. She screamed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. I rushed upstairs to find her standing by the closet, her face white as a sheet. Inside the closet was a small, hidden compartment, and in it, a collection of old photographs and news clippings about the murders. Among them was a recent photo of us, taken without our knowledge. Suddenly the door slammed shut behind us, and the room plunged into darkness. We fumbled for the light switch, but it wouldn't turn on. The air grew cold, and a sinister laugh echoed around us. We realized with horror that we weren't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with a twisted smile and eyes filled with madness. You can't leave, he whispered. You're mine now. We backed away, our hearts pounding. But the door wouldn't budge. The man advanced, and in a moment of sheer terror, I lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Emily and I bolted from the room, racing down the stairs and out of the house. We didn't stop running until we were safely in our car, speeding away from Raven Street. We never returned to the house. The police investigated but found no trace of the man. The house remains abandoned, a dark relic of a nightmarish past. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that we escaped something truly evil, and I wonder if the house still waits, ready to claim its next victims. In the heart of an ancient city, cloaked in the mists of forgotten times, there stood a quaint little antique shop, nestled between the remnants of cobblestone pathways and ivy-clad buildings. Its windows were dusted with the sands of time, and its door creaked on hinges that whispered tales of centuries past. The shop was a trove of mysteries, each artifact holding a story, a secret, a whisper from the past. But of all the enigmas it harbored, none was as unnerving as the painting that hung on the farthest wall of the dimly lit room. The painting was ensconced in an ornate frame, tarnished with age, its gold leaf peeling off like aged skin. The canvas depicted a scene of haunting beauty, a shadowy forest at twilight, where the trees seemed to contort in agony, reaching out with their gnarled branches as if to warn, or perhaps ensnare. At the heart of the forest was a clearing, and in it, a figure cloaked in darkness. Its features blurred, yet its eyes, oh, those eyes. They glowed with a malevolent light, piercing through the canvas, watching, waiting. The legend of the painting was as old as the shop itself. It was said to be cursed, or perhaps possessed. The tales varied, but the essence remained. Those who gazed upon the painting found themselves haunted by visions, tormented by nightmares, and in some cases, driven to madness. It was as if the painting fed on their fears, their sanity, drawing them into its twisted realm. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man with eyes that had seen too much, seldom spoke of the painting. He warned those who asked to steer clear, to admire it from afar, but never to stare too deeply into its abyss. But warnings are often but whispers in the wind to those enticed by the allure of the forbidden. It was on a stormy night, When the rain danced upon the cobblestones and the lightning painted the sky with streaks of terror, that Ethan, a young man with a penchant for the occult, entered the shop. He was drawn not by the promise of shelter from the storm, but by the tales of the painting he had heard whispered in the shadowed corners of dimly lit bars. The shopkeeper eyed him warily, as Ethan's gaze swept across the room, finally resting upon the painting. "Beware, young sir," the old man murmured, a note of fear lacing his words. "Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some secrets best left untold." But Ethan was not to be deterred. He approached the painting, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and fascination. As he stared into the canvas, he felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of being drawn into the depths of the forest, into the very eyes of the figure that lurked within. The shopkeeper found Ethan hours later, staring blankly at the painting, his eyes wide with an unspoken horror. He spoke not a word, responding to neither query nor command. It was as if his soul had been ensnared, trapped within the canvas. In the days that followed, Ethan was consumed by the painting. He spoke of voices in the night, of shadows that moved of their own accord, of eyes that watched him from the darkness. His descent into madness was swift, a chilling testament to the power that lay within the cursed canvas. And then, one night, he vanished. His room bore the signs of a struggle, but of Ethan there was no trace. The only clue left behind was a scrap of paper, upon which was scrawled a single, chilling sentence. "It watches from the painting, and now it watches through my eyes." The painting hangs still in the antique shop, its secrets untold, its curse unbroken. The shopkeeper no longer speaks of it, and those who know of its legend steer clear. But the painting waits, patient and hungry, for the next pair of eyes to lock onto its own, to be drawn into its embrace. And so, the legend grows. A cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk within beauty, of the shadows that dwell in the heart of art. For in the depths of the possessed painting, there lies a darkness that consumes, a malevolence that watches, waiting for the next soul to ensnare in its twisted grasp.